Now listen, Israel, listen carefully to the rules and regulations that I am teaching you to follow so that you may live and enter and take possession of the land that God, the God of your fathers, is giving to you. Don't add a word to what I command you, and don't remove a word from it. Keep the commands of God, your God, that I am commanding you. You saw with your own eyes what God did at Baal Peor, how God destroyed from among you every man who joined in the Baal Peor orgies. But you, the ones who held tight to God, your God, are alive and well, every one of you, today. Pay attention, I'm teaching you the rules and regulations that God commanded me, so that you may live by them in the land you are entering to take up ownership. Keep them. Practice them. You'll become wise and understanding. When people hear and see what's going on, they'll say, "What a great nation. So wise, so understanding. We've never seen anything like it." Yes. What other great nation has gods that are intimate with them the way God, our God, is with us, always ready to listen to us? And what other great nation has rules and regulations as good and fair as this revelation that I'm setting before you today? Just make sure you stay alert. Keep close watch over yourselves. Don't forget anything of what you've seen. Don't let your heart wander off. Stay vigilant as long as you live. Teach what you've seen and heard to your children and grandchildren. That day when you stood before God, your God, at Horeb, God said to me, "Assemble the people in my presence to listen to my words so that they will learn to fear me in holy fear for as long as they live on the land, and then they will teach these same words to their children." You gathered. You stood in the shadow of the mountain. The mountain was ablaze with fire, blazing high into the very heart of heaven. You stood in deep darkness and thick clouds. God spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words but you saw nothing, no form, only a voice. He announced his covenant, the 10 words, by which he commanded you to live. Then he wrote them down on 2 slabs of stone. And God commanded me at that time to teach you the rules and regulations that you are to live by in the land which you are crossing over the Jordan to possess. You saw no form on the day God spoke to you at Horeb from out of the fire. Remember that. Carefully guard yourselves so that you don't turn corrupt and make a form, carving a figure that looks male or female, or looks like a prowling animal or a flying bird or a slithering snake or a fish in a stream. And also carefully guard yourselves so that you don't look up into the skies and see the sun and moon and stars, all the constellations of the skies, and be seduced into worshipping and serving them. God set them out for everybody's benefit, everywhere. But you, God took you right out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to become the people of his inheritance, and that's what you are this very day. But God was angry with me because of you and the things you said. He swore that I'd never cross the Jordan, never get to enter the good land that God, your God, is giving you as an inheritance. This means that I am going to die here. I'm not crossing the Jordan. But you will cross, you'll possess the good land. So stay alert. Don't for a minute forget the covenant which God, your God, made with you. And don't take up with any carved images, no forms of any kind. God, your God, issued clear commands on that. God, your God, is not to be trifled with, he's a consuming fire, a jealous God. When the time comes that you have children and grandchildren, put on years, and start taking things for granted, if you then become corrupt and make any carved images, no matter what their form, by doing what is sheer evil in God's eyes and provoking his anger, I can tell you right now, with heaven and earth as witnesses, that it will be all over for you. You'll be kicked off the land that you're about to cross over the Jordan to possess. Believe me, you'll have a very short stay there. You'll be ruined, completely ruined. God will scatter you far and wide, a few of you will survive here and there in the nations where God will drive you. There you can worship your homemade gods to your heart's content, your wonderful gods of wood and stone that can't see or hear or eat or smell. But even there, if you seek God, your God, you'll be able to find him if you're serious, looking for him with your whole heart and soul. When troubles come and all these awful things happen to you, in future days you will come back to God, your God, and listen obediently to what he says. God, your God, is above all a compassionate God. In the end he will not abandon you, he won't bring you to ruin, he won't forget the covenant with your ancestors which he swore to them. Ask questions. Find out what has been going on all these years before you were born. From the day God created man and woman on this earth, and from the horizon in the east to the horizon in the west, as far back as you can imagine and as far away as you can imagine, has as great a thing as this ever happened? Has anyone ever heard of such a thing? Has a people ever heard, as you did, a God speaking out of the middle of the fire and lived to tell the story? Or has a God ever tried to select for himself a nation from within a nation using trials, miracles, and war, putting his strong hand in, reaching his long arm out, a spectacle awesome and staggering, the way God, your God, did it for you in Egypt while you stood right there and watched? You were shown all this so that you would know that God is, well, God. He's the only God there is. He's it. He made it possible for you to hear his voice out of heaven to discipline you. Down on earth, he showed you the big fire and again you heard his words, this time out of the fire. He loved your ancestors and chose to work with their children. He personally and powerfully brought you out of Egypt in order to displace bigger and stronger and older nations with you, bringing you out and turning their land over to you as an inheritance. And now it's happening. This very day. Know this well, then. Take it to heart right now, God is in heaven above, God is on earth below. He's the only God there is. Obediently live by his rules and commands which I'm giving you today so that you'll live well and your children after you, oh, you'll live a long time in the land that God, your God, is giving you. Then Moses set aside 3 towns in the country on the east side of the Jordan to which someone who had unintentionally killed a person could flee and find refuge. If the murder was unintentional and there was no history of bad blood, the murderer could flee to one of these cities and save his life, Bezer in the wilderness on the tableland for the Reubenites, Ramoth in Gilead for the Gadites, and Golan in Bashan for the Manassites. This is the revelation that Moses presented to the people of Israel. These are the testimonies, the rules, and regulations Moses spoke to the people of Israel after their exodus from Egypt and arrival on the east side of the Jordan in the valley near Baal Peor. It was the country of Sihon king of the Amorites who ruled from Heshbon. Moses and the people of Israel fought and beat him after they left Egypt and took his land. They also took the land of Og king of Bashan. The 2 Amorite kings held the country on the east of the Jordan from Aroer on the bank of the brook Arnon as far north as Mount Zion, that is, Mount Hermon, all the Araba plain east of the Jordan, and as far south as the Sea of the Araba, the Dead Sea, beneath the slopes of Mount Pisgah. Moses teaches Israel on the plains of Moab. Moses called all Israel together. He said to them, attention, Israel. Listen obediently to the rules and regulations I am delivering to your listening ears today. Learn them. Live them. God, our God, made a covenant with us at Horeb. God didn't just make this covenant with our parents, he made it also with us, with all of us who are alive right now. God spoke to you personally out of the fire on the mountain. At the time I stood between God and you, to tell you what God said. You were afraid, remember, of the fire and wouldn't climb the mountain. He said, I am God, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of a house of slaves. No other gods, only me. No carved gods of any size, shape, or form of anything whatever, whether of things that fly or walk or swim. Don't bow down to them and don't serve them because I am God, your God, and I'm a most jealous God. I hold parents responsible for any sins they pass on to their children to the 3rd, and yes, even to the 4th generation. But I'm lovingly loyal to the thousands who love me and keep my commandments. No using the name of God, your God, in curses or silly banter, God won't put up with the irreverent use of his name. No working on the Sabbath, keep it holy just as God, your God, commanded you. Work 6 days, doing everything you have to do, but the 7th day is a Sabbath, a rest day, no work, not you, your son, your daughter, your servant, your maid, your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, and not even the foreigner visiting your town. That way your servants and maids will get the same rest as you. Don't ever forget that you were slaves in Egypt and God, your God, got you out of there in a powerful show of strength. That's why God, your God, commands you to observe the day of Sabbath rest. Respect your father and mother, God, your God, commands it. You'll have a long life, the land that God is giving you will treat you well. No murder. No adultery. No stealing. No lies about your neighbor. No coveting your neighbor's wife. And no lusting for his house, field, servant, maid, ox, or donkey either, nothing that belongs to your neighbor. These are the words that God spoke to the whole congregation at the mountain. He spoke in a tremendous voice from the fire and cloud and dark mist. And that was it. No more words. Then he wrote them on 2 slabs of stone and gave them to me. As it turned out, when you heard the voice out of that dark cloud and saw the mountain on fire, you approached me, all the heads of your tribes and your leaders, and said, our God has revealed to us his glory and greatness. We've heard him speak from the fire today. We've seen that God can speak to humans and they can still live. But why risk it further? This huge fire will devour us if we stay around any longer. If we hear God's voice anymore, we'll die for sure. Has anyone ever known of anyone who has heard the voice of God the way we have and lived to tell the story? From now on, you go and listen to what God, our God, says and then tell us what God tells you. We'll listen and we'll do it. God heard what you said to me and told me, I've heard what the people said to you. They're right, good and true words. What I wouldn't give if they'd always feel this way, continuing to revere me and always keep all my commands, they'd have a good life forever, they and their children. Go ahead and tell them to go home to their tents. But you stay here with me so I can tell you every commandment and all the rules and regulations that you must teach them so they'll know how to live in the land that I'm giving them as their own. So be very careful to act exactly as God commands you. Don't veer off to the right or the left. Walk straight down the road God commands so that you'll have a good life and live a long time in the land that you're about to possess. This is the commandment, the rules and regulations, that God, your God, commanded me to teach you to live out in the land you're about to cross into to possess. This is so that you'll live in deep reverence before God lifelong, observing all his rules and regulations that I'm commanding you, you and your children and your grandchildren, living good long lives. Listen obediently, Israel. Do what you're told so that you'll have a good life, a life of abundance and bounty, just as God promised, in a land abounding in milk and honey. Attention, Israel. God, our God. God the one and only. Love God, your God, with your whole heart, love him with all that's in you, love him with all you've got. Write these commandments that I've given you today on your hearts. Get them inside of you and then get them inside your children. Talk about them wherever you are, sitting at home or walking in the street, talk about them from the time you get up in the morning to when you fall into bed at night. Tie them on your hands and foreheads as a reminder, inscribe them on the doorposts of your homes and on your city gates. When God, your God, ushers you into the land he promised through your ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to give you, you're going to walk into large, bustling cities you didn't build, well-furnished houses you didn't buy, come upon wells you didn't dig, vineyards and olive orchards you didn't plant. When you take it all in and settle down, pleased and content, make sure you don't forget how you got there. God brought you out of slavery in Egypt. Deeply respect God, your God. Serve and worship him exclusively. Back up your promises with his name only. Don't fool around with other gods, the gods of your neighbors, because God, your God, who is alive among you is a jealous God. Don't provoke him, igniting his hot anger that would burn you right off the face of the earth. Don't push God, your God, to the wall as you did that day at Massah, the testing place. Carefully keep the commands of God, your God, all the requirements and regulations he gave you. Do what is right, do what is good in God's sight so you'll live a good life and be able to march in and take this pleasant land that God so solemnly promised through your ancestors, throwing out your enemies left and right, exactly as God said. The next time your child asks you, what do these requirements and regulations and rules that God, our God, has commanded mean? Tell your child, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt and God powerfully intervened and got us out of that country. We stood there and watched as God delivered miracle signs, great wonders, and evil visitations on Egypt, on Pharaoh and his household. He pulled us out of there so he could bring us here and give us the land he so solemnly promised to our ancestors. That's why God commanded us to follow all these rules, so that we would live reverently before God, our God, as he gives us this good life, keeping us alive for a long time to come. It will be a set right and put together life for us if we make sure that we do this entire commandment in the presence of God, our God, just as he commanded us to do.